Imagine a team of engineers designing a brand new skyscraper, and in their construction plans they forget to account for, I don't know, gravity. Would you want to live in that building? Or would you look at it and think, well, no thank you, this thing is a ticking bomb? Right. And yet, every year, people run businesses that look exactly like that building. Sometimes there is no business plan at all, or a plan that looks really nice. It might even have a bunch of fancy charts, billion-dollar projections that look like hockey sticks, but it would ignore the business equivalent of gravity. Businesses with a real plan grow about 30% faster, are more likely to survive, and by some estimates, 2.5 times more likely to get funding. So, yeah, it doesn't sound like a bad idea to put a plan together, and it's easy to make a plan. But doing it right, that's the hard part. What we'll be looking at today is just the tip of the iceberg of how badly business plans can be misused. But by the end of the video, you'll know the key ingredient that every successful business plan shares, so you can build a plan that actually is not a ticking bomb. Have you heard of Holmes? No, not Sherlock. Elizabeth Holmes. She is an infamous billionaire and the founder of Theranos, or to be precise, ex-billionaire. Forbes initially named her the youngest self-made female billionaire in 2014, with a staggering net worth of $4.5 billion. Ultimately, Forbes revised her net worth to zero. Holmes had a business plan. Beautiful document, hundreds of pages. It seems they had answered to pretty much every question. Projections, market analysis, medical research, experts' opinion, whatever you ask for, it's likely already there. And yet, there was a big problem in their plan. A few problems, actually. But before we talk about Theranos and a few other names you probably know well, let's discuss what business plans are and who actually needs them. A lot of people think a business plan is something you write to get funding, but that's not what a plan is for. Well, at least it's not all it's for. A business plan is your decision-making tool. It's like your blueprint of all the business ideas and all that strategic thinking. When you show your plan to investors to raise capital, it's called pitching. I mean, you wouldn't usually show the full business plan to investors, at least not initially. Typically, it's just 10-15 slides of key highlights, and it's called a pitch book. But as you work on your business plan, it forces you to think and ask yourself hard questions. For example, who's going to be buying your product? Why and why now? Do you have enough cash buffer? And so on. This step gives you an opportunity to check your assumptions. Think about it this way. When architects designed Burj Khalifa in Dubai, they didn't just sketch a pretty 2,700 feet tower and hoped it would stand. The design phase for the tower lasted a few years. Architects and engineers mapped every single detail because if something failed, well, it's even scary to think about what would happen. Business plans work the same way, but for businesses. They are meant to show you where something might not work before you waste a lot of money and time. But I've spoken to so many business owners who skip this step entirely. They would fall in love with their idea and then realize 6 months later, or even years later, that the math doesn't work, or the market doesn't care, or they didn't consider something critical. And then what do? So having a solid business plan could be the difference between a big success and an embarrassing failure. And the world is full of colorful examples of both outcomes. Imagine somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, we are trying to let some random people sleep in other random people's homes on air mattresses. Oh, and both of those random people will be paying us for facilitating that. Oh, and there will be breakfast. Anyway, will you invest in us?" What would you say to that, if you say anything at all? But that's how Airbnb started. Airbnb today is a global giant, effectively competing with the largest hotel names. Millions of listings. The company is worth tens of billions of dollars. And Airbnb is one of the world's most visited travel websites. But back in 2008, he was just 3 guys in a small apartment in San Francisco who couldn't pay rent.
The rent on this apartment was increased 25%. And I and another roommate decided we had had enough and I was moving out.
So they just rented out hair mattresses on their floor to strangers.
There was no bed in this bedroom, but Joe had an airbed in the closet. So instead of calling it a bed and breakfast, they called it an airbed and breakfast.
Can you imagine? They also offered breakfast as part of their all-inclusive package. And so that's where the name came from, Air, Bed, and Breakfast, Airbnb. Believe it or not, they did pitch that exact idea to investors. Needless to say, it didn't really go that well.
Of the 15 people we got introduced to, I think about, we got introduced over email. I think about 6, 7, or 8 of them didn't even reply to the email, so we never heard from them again. About 7 or 8 replied. Of those, half of them said this doesn't fit my investment thesis.
They were selling their idea instead of the customer's pain. And their idea was that Airbnb would get paid for homeowners letting strangers sleep in their homes, have breakfast, blah, blah, blah. Sounds a little insane, right? And that's what investors heard. Blah, 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 insane, insane, ridiculous. Their early business plans weren't helping either. The founders were inexperienced, and as they were seeking money, had a lot to learn about pitching. Their charts were confusing, colors were off. Allegedly, they even made an error in their market size projections and only ended up changing it from millions to billions after one of the investors pointed that out. They forgot 3 zeros in their projections. Not a big deal, right? But the problem wasn't even the design or the numbers at first. It was the story. Their story was to let random people live in other people's homes. But it wasn't until they started focusing on the pain they were solving when investors started paying attention. So, what was the pain? As you know, hotels can be very expensive, especially during big events and peak seasons. Booking was frustrating, and it still is. So, for travelers, the options were very limited. On the other side, you had people with spare rooms sitting empty. But the short-term rental market was nearly non-existent and mostly focused on the vacation properties where VRBO dominated. So that was the pain on both sides. And Airbnb was sitting right in the middle of a multi-billion-dollar pain overlap, helping travelers find affordable, reliable places to stay and helping hosts rent their spaces hassle-free. See the difference? Hosting strangers in your home sounds, well, questionable. But connecting hosts and travelers for mutual benefits sounds like a very smart solution. In the early days, Airbnb pitched more than 100 investors. All said no. One of the prominent investors famously told them, "You guys have no traction, no credibility, and your market doesn't even exist."
I felt like the world was against me. I would go to sleep with my heart pounding every night. I'd wake up like wide awake, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to get through the day? We have no money.
But they didn't quit. Instead of rewriting the business plan from scratch, they started rewriting how they thought about the business. They realized they were focusing on the wrong question. Not how do we sell this crazy idea, but what problem are we really solving? So they went back to basics. And that's when everything changed. They reframed their plan to community marketplace solving housing shortages during big events. Then they started collecting real data, bookings per week, returning guests, savings over hotels, and once they had even a bit of traction supported by data, investors started listening. Their business plan itself barely changed. The difference was that now it was framed as a solution and had empirical evidence to prove that it actually works. In 2010, Airbnb had raised its first real funding round of around $7 million. In 2011, it raised another $112 million. It was in 89 countries, and the same investors who ignored them just a year earlier were now lining up for the chance to get in.
And I remember there was a quote by Andy Grove. He's one of the founders of Intel, I believe. And he said, "Bad companies are destroyed by a crisis. Good companies survive a crisis. But great companies are defined by a crisis."
Airbnb fixed their plan by reflecting reality better. MoviePass was hoping for a different reality by ignoring math. And somehow, for a while, it actually worked. At least, it looked like it did. Launched in 2011, MoviePass was a subscription service that allowed users to see unlimited movies in theaters for a very low monthly fee. Initially, they were charging around $50 per month, but then in 2017, trying to get very big very fast, they dropped their prices to $9.95 per month. For consumers, it was a dream come true, but for MoviePass, this created a Homer Simpson at a buffet problem.
Take the day off.
So you paid them about $10 a month. They gave you MoviePass debit card, and you could use that card to buy movie tickets. Actual movie tickets to go to a theater. As many movie tickets as you wanted. Sounds simple, right? Except for one problem. MoviePass had to pay full price to theaters for every single ticket. So maybe let's do the math. One movie ticket was about $9 on average at that time. If you watched just 2 movies a month, MoviePass lost money on you. If you watched 5 movies, they lost a lot of money on you. And in many instances, the company wasn't even making any money even if you watched just 1 movie. Because $9 was the average price. Some theaters were actually charging more. Sounds weird, right? And I think it is. The business model literally depended on people not using the product they were paying for. You're not missing anything. The math didn't work. Did management not see this coming? Well, actually they did. Their business plan didn't hide the problem with the business economics. It just ignored it. Or to be more precise, they believed it was temporary. The plan said, we'll lose money now, but scale will save us. So let's just get millions of subscribers and people will eventually stop going to theaters but still continue paying the fee. MoviePass was also hoping to negotiate better rates with theaters in the future when they become bigger. And they wanted to monetize the users by selling data to studios and advertising. Alright, there is some logic to this, maybe. Except, neither has happened. At least not quickly enough. Heavy users went to the movie theaters almost every day. Theaters refused to play along. Data monetization revenue extremely limited. But instead of adjusting the business model, management went after the users. You know what they did? They blocked popular screenings first, so people couldn't watch them through MoviePass. Then stopped offering unlimited tickets to heavy users. And then they even changed passwords for some people behind the scenes so people couldn't log in. All this didn't make their users happy. And because the company was always short on cash and often couldn't pay its suppliers, they started experiencing frequent service outages. And that resulted in even more discouraged customers and numerous consumer complaints. In 2018, MoviePass was losing up to $40 million a month.
There's stuff there. The guys who took over MoviePass lost $250 million for people in 12 months.
And in January of 2020, MoviePass filed for bankruptcy. What makes their case so noteworthy is that it was 100% avoidable. The math was always broken. Everyone knew about it. MoviePass, investors, even customers joked about how it couldn't possibly be sustainable. But MoviePass kept insisting they would figure things out later. So the lesson here is if your entire business depends on someone else playing along at some point in the future, you need at least some evidence to support your assumption before you put all your eggs in one basket. MoviePass raised over $300 million from investors who believed the hype. Their plan looked good on paper: massive market, recurring revenue, subscription model, tech angle, all their favorite buzzwords. But the economic assumptions were so far-fetched and unsupported by facts, it was just a matter of time till reality would catch up to it. And if Airbnb was just not reflecting reality well enough, and MoviePass was hoping for a different reality, what happens when someone tries to bend reality itself? Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos, was worth $4.5 billion. She was on magazine covers, speaking at conferences, hailed the next Steve Jobs. She was even wearing the same black turtlenecks like Jobs. Same obsession with changing the world too, promising to revolutionize healthcare. And her promise was revolutionary. She claimed she could run hundreds of medical tests using just one drop of blood. No needles, no pain, instant results. A fraction of the lab cost. If it were true, it would have indeed changed healthcare forever. But it wasn't true. Their device was called the Edison. It was a relatively small, sleek-looking medical laboratory, about the size of a desktop. It was meant to be a lab in a box. You'd place a tiny cartridge with a droplet of blood inside, and within minutes, it would, allegedly, test for everything from cholesterol to cancer markers. Later, Theranos claimed to have built an even smaller, more advanced version called the Mini Lab. That version would bring full diagnostic power right to your home, with even more markers. It sounded like science fiction made real, and Holmes was making history. No wonder so many big names wanted to get on board, and because Holmes sold a dream so compelling, people stopped asking questions. She then built a board of directors filled with former secretaries of state, retired generals, senators, Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, T. Mattis.
In our case, those were people who I had the privilege of getting to know and in many cases working with for, in some cases, a couple of years before we asked them to join the board.
See, powerful figures. Even though they weren't scientists, they still brought credibility. And Elizabeth was compelling. She had this intense and blinking stare. She also spoke in an unnaturally deep voice that she claimed gave her more authority in boardrooms.
When people find what they're truly passionate about, they can build great things.
And she was convinced, or at least convinced everyone else, that she was on a mission to change the world. She quoted Apple, talked about purpose, disruption, saving lives, and to investors, she wasn't just another startup founder. She was another Steve Jobs. So investors poured in hundreds of millions. Nobody wanted to miss the next Apple. But in reality, Theranos was not the next Apple, and Holmes was not the next Steve Jobs. Because Edison was alive. In 2015, a Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carrero sensed that something was iffy and started digging. He talked to former employees, reviewed leaked documents, investigated patient complaints, and, against multiple threats and harassment, he published a story that blew the whole thing wide open. Edison simply couldn't do what Theranos promised. The science just wasn't there yet. So inside the Theranos labs, it was chaos. Engineers begged for more time. Technicians saw test results swing widely, but Holmes claimed that the technology was so revolutionary, so proprietary, that the secrecy had to be protected at all times. And investors couldn't even see the lab itself. They couldn't review the data or validate the claims. When visitors came for rare demonstrations, they weren't shown real results. Behind the scenes, the Theranos team was swapping Edison out with commercial machines from Siemens or other manufacturers. To make it worse, the blood tests were widely inaccurate. The machines couldn't run most of the tests they claimed. And instead of using their revolutionary technology, Theranos was secretly running more tests on traditional lab equipment just to provide at least some results to their customers. They were using the same machines everyone else used to do blood work. They were basically buying standard blood tests and selling them as their own. But because they were collecting only small droplets of blood, as their marketing promised, they had to dilute blood samples to make them work with tiny amounts, and hoped nobody would notice their results were completely misleading. Patients were getting false positives for diseases they didn't have, and false negatives for diseases they did have. People were making life-altering medical decisions based on the test results that were just wrong. And it was later proven that Holmes knew. She knew the technology didn't work. She knew that tests were unreliable. She knew patients were being harmed. But instead of admitting failure and fixing the problem, she doubled down. She raised more money, hired more lawyers, threatened anyone who questioned her. Employees who raised concerns were fired. Anyone who asked too many questions was labeled disloyal and was threatened. It's tempting to see this just a story about one person trying to fake it until they make it. But it's more than that. The entire business plan rested on one illusion that the Edison machine worked. But many lab experts were pointing out that what Theranos was promising simply wasn't realistic at the time. And at a certain point, Holmes realized that Edison didn't work. Yet, she continued working hard to support and nurture the illusion she created. In her fight against time, she resorted to manipulation, silencing anybody she could silence, but there is only so much you can do when you try to bend reality. Ultimately, reality always wins. In 2018, Theranos was dissolved. Investors lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Net worth of Elizabeth Holmes was revised from $4.5 billion to nothing. And in 2022, she was convicted of fraud and sentenced to over 11 years in prison. Airbnb's initial plan didn't fail because their idea was bad. They were failing at first because their plan didn't frame reality well enough. MoviePass didn't fail because subscriptions don't work. Netflix and so many other platforms proved subscriptions work perfectly fine, and people love movies. MoviePass failed because their financial assumptions were broken from day one, and they hoped growth would magically fix reality. Theranos didn't fail because blood testing is impossible. They failed because they didn't even build a business. They built an illusion around technology that wasn't working at that time and then lied about it by bending reality. 3 different problems, 3 different outcomes, but one common thread: reality. So if you're building a business or thinking about writing a plan, that's what actually matters first and foremost. Is your plan realistic? Because there's a big difference between reality-tested assumptions and wishful thinking. And how you frame your reality also matters. But that does not apply to just big startups with millions in funding. For example, let's say you run a local dental practice. Every year, your revenue has grown maybe 5% in the past, or maybe 10%. And then, all of a sudden, you want to start projecting 30% annual growth, because you will run marketing. Well, okay, 30% growth with the right marketing campaign is very possible. I actually have a video about how to build a strong marketing campaign. If you are interested, you can watch it next. But if you project 30% growth, have you actually tested that 30% assumption? Is it feasible? Can your company and your team support 30% growth? Do you even have enough money to put into marketing? Does it make sense to grow that fast? And if it does, why now? And that's just one very simple example. There is a lot of nuances when it comes to business planning. By the way, if you're interested, we've put a free guide together to building a strong business plan. And there's also a reality check toolkit in it. You can find the link below in the video. and the guide is completely free. But as I mentioned before, one thing to always keep in mind when planning for your business is reality. Regardless of how you build a structure, gravity will always be there. That's their reality. And the plans that deeply respect that reality will be what ultimately separates the buildings that will stand for ages from the ones that will not. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the channel, please consider subscribing, and see you in the next video.